Alice Brewer's mornings followed a liturgy she had designed for exactly this purpose: to leave no room. She rose at 7:30. Tea without sugar. Correspondence at the escritoire by the east window, where the light came in gray and useful, and asked nothing of her. Every letter answered in the same measured, unhurried hand. No word wasted. No feeling permitted to bleed between the lines. Her housekeeper, Mrs. Colton, had told someone once that Miss Brewer ran her household the way a fine watch runs. Everything turning, nothing touching. Alice had overheard this, and felt something close to gratitude. She had been working toward exactly that for 3 years. It was good to know the effort showed. This was the life she had built, not the life she had imagined at 22. She had stopped permitting herself to think clearly about the life she had imagined at 22. But this one was solid. It was hers, and it required nothing from anyone, least of all from Tidwell Nelson. The difficulty with a life constructed around an absence is that absence has edges. You learn them the way you learn the edges of a room in the dark, not by looking, but by walking into them again and again until you know exactly where they are. A name at a dinner table, a silhouette across a street that turns at the wrong moment, a particular quality of laugh from an adjoining room that stops you mid-sentence because it sounds, just for the space of half a breath, like his. Alice had become proficient at recovering from these moments. In the beginning, she had allowed herself the time it took to draw one slow breath. Now she needed only the gap between two words. She considered this an improvement. She had been 19 the first time she saw him across a room, laughing at something, head thrown back, entirely at ease in the way of men who have always been told they are remarkable. She had thought, that is a man who has never had to work to be noticed. And she had looked away deliberately, because she had been raised on better sense than to waste herself on beautiful, careless things. He had noticed her looking away. That, she would understand much later, was the beginning of the game. Not her falling in love. That came afterward, genuinely, in the way real things are real. But his interest had not been struck by her warmth. It had been struck by her indifference. She had been, without knowing it, the one piece on the table that refused to be predictable. She had not known there was a table. Alice pressed her hand to her chest. The old instinct, the one she had never quite trained out of herself, and stood at the east window in the gray morning light. She felt nothing. Good.
It's a lovely evening, isn't it?
It is, especially with you here.
I'm glad we came.
She thought about him for all of it. The Henderson Gala was, by any reasonable measure, an occasion Alice had every right to enjoy. The champagne was the kind that made you believe, briefly, in the essential goodness of things. Alice had worn her new dress, deep green silk, the color her father had always loved, and arrived feeling something close, without being precisely, to anticipation. She had not anticipated Tidwell Nelson standing by the far window. She knew it was him before she saw his face. Something in the set of his shoulders. 3 years, and the body still remembered what the mind had spent every available hour trying to unteach itself. She had perhaps half a second before he turned. She used it to compose her face into something that resembled pleasant indifference. She thought she managed it rather well. He was different. He was still handsome. She was not so far gone in bitterness as to pretend otherwise. But the easy confidence she remembered had been replaced by something quieter. The careless charm, the smile that used to arrive as though the world had been arranged for his amusement, gone. In its place was a man who stood as though he had learned the full weight of himself, and found it heavier than expected. He looked like someone carrying something he had earned. Good, said the part of her that had spent 3 years building walls. Let him carry it. He stacked every brick. But there was another part of her, smaller, badly governed, insufficiently disciplined, that noticed the lines at the corners of his eyes that had not been there before. That noticed his hands, which were not holding a drink but were simply at his sides, still, as though he had stopped performing for the room entirely. She did not give that part of her a voice. She had long since learned not to. He crossed the room toward her. Of course he did. Alice, not Miss Brewer, Alice. As though the last 3 years had been a brief inconvenience, rather than the entire reorganization of her life. She looked at him with the full, practiced blankness she had cultivated for exactly this occasion. Mr. Nelson, something tightened in his jaw. She noted it with clinical precision. She noted also, against every instruction she had ever given herself, that he had not come with charm. He had come with bare hands, and an expression she had never once seen on him. Humility. Not the performed kind. The real, uncomfortable kind that does not know what to do with its own hands. I am glad you are well, he said. I am quite well, she agreed, and turned to greet Lady Henderson, who appeared at precisely the right moment, like a benevolent act of timing. She did not look back at him for the rest of the evening.
I don't know what to do.
We'll figure it out, together.
Thank you.
She went to Hartley's bookshop on a Wednesday because she always went on Wednesdays, and she was not going to rearrange the architecture of her own life around the possibility that Tidwell Nelson might frequent the same establishment. That would have been absurd. That would have been a kind of surrender she had not authorized. He was there, naturally, not positioned, not waiting, simply standing in the history section with his back to the door, turning pages with the unhurried attention of someone who had genuinely forgotten there was a world outside the book. Alice stood at the entrance for a moment longer than was dignified, then decided that retreating would be more revealing than proceeding. She proceeded, toward the novels, on the opposite wall. With great composure, she had nearly reached them when she heard him say, quietly, without turning, "They had the Fenwick essay collection come in last week. Third shelf from the left, near the lamp. I didn't ask them to hold it. I just noticed it was the sort of thing you had mentioned once." Alice stopped walking. She stood with her back to him, one hand resting on the nearest shelf, not touching any particular book. Simply steadying. "You mentioned it," he continued, and now she heard him turn, though he kept the distance. "At the Cartwright dinner. You were talking to Mrs. Cartwright about essay collections, and you said you had been looking for the Fenwick volume for over a year. You said it in that particular way you have, when something matters to you but you would rather it didn't." He stopped himself. "I'm not performing anything," he said. "I simply noticed it was there." She turned and looked at him. The terrible thing, the genuinely unconscionable thing, was that she believed him. A man performing would have presented the book with both hands, and a speech constructed for maximum effect. This was not that. This was a man who had been listening at a dinner table, before the gala, before any of this, and had filed away something small and specific because it mattered to her, and had not thought to mention it until now. There was no theater in it. That was the part she could not dismiss. She crossed to the third shelf from the left. The Fenwick collection was there. She took it without a word, carried it to the counter without looking at him again. But her hand, she noticed, was not entirely steady. She was unreasonably annoyed at her own hand. He called on a Thursday. No note sent ahead. No warning, which was either breathtakingly presumptuous, or the action of a man who understood that a note would give her the opportunity to refuse, and had decided he would rather be turned away in person than on paper. Alice received both interpretations simultaneously as she came down the stairs to find Tidwell Nelson in her entrance hall, hat in his hands, looking like someone who had made an irreversible decision and was no longer entirely certain it had been wise. Mrs. Colton stood beside him with the rigid neutrality of a woman who had formed opinions she would take to her grave. "Mr. Nelson," Alice said, reaching the bottom stair. She did not close the remaining distance. "This is an irregular call." "I know," he said. "I apologize for the irregularity. I would have written first, but I was concerned you would decline." That was a reasonable concern. Yes. He met her eyes, and again she was struck by it. That quality, new and persistent. The complete absence of performance. The charm had been a kind of armor, she understood now. What stood in her entrance hall was a man who had taken it off, and not replaced it with anything except the fact of being there. "I am asking for 1 hour," he said. "Not to explain myself. I know you don't owe me that. Not to apologize, because I understand the word has been exhausted between us. 1 honest hour. Whatever you feel, I am not asking you to suppress it. I am asking only that you be in the same room with me without the armor." Silence. Alice watched him with the careful, level regard she had developed over 3 years of practicing it. "Why?" she said. Not a question, precisely, an invitation to convince her. "Because," Tidwell said. And for just a moment, something broke the surface of that quiet gravity, something unguarded and specific. "I would rather have 1 honest hour with you in any condition than continue to exist in a world where the only version of me you carry is the one that deserved to be left in that corridor." She considered him for a long moment. The clock in the next room. The city outside, carrying on. 1 hour, she said. The Botanical Gardens. Saturday. In public. Yes. If you produce a single gesture that feels calculated, I will leave without a word. Understood.
And Tidwell. She had almost reached the drawing room. She paused without turning. "If this is still a game of any kind, I will know. And I will make certain that every drawing room in London knows exactly who you are." A silence. "I know you would," he said quietly. "I know I have earned the threat. I have no defense to offer except that I am not, this time, keeping score." She went into the drawing room. She did not cancel on Saturday.
The Botanical Gardens were full of ordinary people who wanted nothing more than to look at plants, which Alice appreciated enormously. Witnesses. The uncomplicated world, carrying on regardless. Tidwell walked beside her at a careful distance. Not performed, but instinctive. The distance of someone who understood he had not yet been given permission to less. She noted this. Filed it in the place where she kept things she was not yet ready to examine. They walked in silence. Not comfortable, but honest, which was not what she had expected of him. And honesty was considerably harder to dismiss than charm. I have rehearsed this, he said eventually, looking at the path ahead. Many times. Every version sounded like a man performing the idea of having changed. So I am going to say it badly, and hope the truth of it survives. That is an uncharacteristically humble approach, she said. I have had 3 years to study humility, he said. I have become far more advanced than I ever intended. She said nothing. But she did not walk away. I knew what I was doing, he said. That evening. I am not going to tell you I was young or foolish, or that I didn't know better. I knew better. I knew exactly who you were, long before the wager. And I chose to treat that knowledge as something I could spend. As though your feeling something real was a currency I had won, rather than something you had given freely. He stopped walking. Alice stopped too, because her body made that decision independently of her instructions to it. What I didn't understand, he said, was what I was actually trading away. Not only your trust, though I destroyed that, and I am not minimizing it, but I didn't realize until it was permanent, that I had traded away my own capacity for this. He looked at her directly, without flinching. Every room has had less in it since that night. I didn't understand what I was forfeiting, when I was still the kind of man who made wagers of that kind. Alice stood very still. The traitorous pull moved through her like a current. She had disciplined herself against it for 3 years. She gave it no name now, but she felt it, undeniably, as a physical fact she could no longer entirely govern. That, she said carefully, is a graceful framing of your own loss, almost entirely about what you forfeited. You're right. Without pause, without defense. I slid into my own grief so naturally I didn't notice the direction. Your loss was real and greater, and it is not mine to center myself in it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Show me the orchid house. I have been told it is worth the time." They walked on. It was not forgiveness, but it was the first foothold on a wall she had believed to be sheer. The package arrived on a Tuesday. Alice noticed the day before she noticed anything else about it. She stood at the entrance table regarding the wrapped parcel, the way you regard something that has arrived from an unexpected direction, with the wariness owed to uncertain things. Inside was the Moreau manuscript. She sat down. The Moreau manuscript was a private collection of correspondence on 18th century botanical illustration, produced in an edition of 40 copies in 1887, and distributed among the author's correspondence. Alice knew this because she had spent 2 years intermittently attempting to locate one. She had mentioned it precisely once in passing, at a lecture on natural illustration she had attended with Constance 8 months ago. Tidwell had been across the room. She had not known he could hear her. There was no note inside the wrapping. Only the manuscript, and a small card in a hand she had not seen in 3 years, but recognized without having to think about it. I found this through a dealer in Edinburgh. There is no romantic gesture intended in the sending. I simply thought it should belong to someone who would understand it properly, and I do not know anyone who would understand it better than you. There is no expectation attached. Please do not feel any obligation to acknowledge it. T.N. Alice read the card twice. Then she set it down very carefully and went to stand at the window for a long time. The thing that was most difficult, more difficult even than the thoughtfulness of the finding, was the instruction not to acknowledge it. A man performing would have required thanks, would have timed his arrival at her door to coincide with the delivery, positioned himself to witness the effect. This man had arranged for the package and then, apparently, simply gone away. There was no audience built into it. That was the part she could not reason her way around. She wrote no note in return. But she read the manuscript that evening for 3 hours without putting it down, and when she finally closed it, she found herself sitting in the lamplight thinking, despite every wall, every armor, every carefully maintained distance, that it was a very fine gift. That he had known it would be. That he had known this about her at a lecture 8 months ago, when she had not been paying attention to him at all. That she was not entirely certain what to do with that. Constance Fairweather had been Alice's closest friend since the age of 16, and she had the particular gift of saying the difficult thing in the tone of someone remarking pleasantly on the weather. They were in Constance's garden, the overgrown, opinionated kind of garden that had never been disciplined, because Constance believed strongly that gardens should be allowed to arrive at their own conclusions. Alice had not planned to speak of any of it. The words came without authorization, the way they sometimes do when you have been carrying something too long in too small a space. Constance listened the way she always listened, her full self, completely present, asking nothing in return. When Alice finished, Constance poured more tea. "He sent you the manuscript," she said. "Yes. And told you not to acknowledge it." "Yes. And in the garden he corrected himself mid-sentence, when you pointed out he was making it about his own grief." "Immediately." without defending himself first. Constance was quiet in the particular way she was quiet when she was forming something precise. "Do you still feel something for him?" she asked. "I feel something for who he appears to be now," Alice said, with the care of a woman who respected language too much to use it loosely. "I don't know if that person is real. I don't know if I am, for the second time, watching a performance so accomplished, I cannot locate the actor. And that uncertainty," Constance said, "is what you are using to stay exactly where you are." It was not a question. Alice looked at her tea. "There is a difference," Constance continued, setting down her cup with the quiet authority of someone who has been waiting to say this for some time, "between wisdom and paralysis. They can look remarkably similar from the inside. The wall you built was necessary. It was right. It saved you. But you have been living in it for 3 years now, and I think you have started to mistake it for your actual home." Alice said nothing. A sparrow landed on the garden wall, regarded the scene with complete indifference, and left. "There is a version of this," Alice said finally, "where I trust him, and I am wrong, and there is nothing left afterward." "Yes," said Constance, "and there is a version where I don't, and I am safe, and I am also entirely alone, and I spend whatever remains of my life in a house with no windows." "Also yes," said Constance. "Those are not equivalent risks." "No. But I notice you are describing them as though they are, and I think you know exactly what that means." The garden held its silence. "That is," Alice said at last, "an extremely inconvenient conversation." "I know," said Constance pleasantly. "I have been waiting to have it for 6 months." The Whitmore concert required nothing except sitting quietly and appreciating things. Alice had been looking forward to it for precisely that reason. She had not anticipated the rain, or Tidwell, 3 seats along, or that at the interval, when the rain became suddenly spectacular, the conservatory at the end of the east wing would be the only quiet room in a house full of stranded guests, and that they would each, separately, have the same instinct to find it. It was a beautiful room. Glass ceiling, rain hammering against it in long silver lines. The garden beyond dissolved to shadow and wet green. The air was warm and close, and smelled of earth and growing things. Alice stood at the far end by the camellias. Tidwell stood at the door. Neither of them left. "I should," she began. "I'll go back," he said immediately. "You were here first." "No." The word arrived before she had reviewed it. She kept her eyes on the rain. "Stay." The silence that followed had weight in it. 3 years in it. The wager, the corridor, the bookshop, the garden, the manuscript, and everything Constance had said about walls and windows. "I want to ask you something," Alice said. "The true answer, not the graceful one. Yes, when you came back, when you began all of this, was any part of it still a game? Any part of you still keeping score?" A long silence. Rain against glass. "In the beginning, yes." He didn't look away. "The first impulse was the one I was trained on. Pursue what you've lost, as a matter of record. 2 weeks. He paused. "And then I heard you laugh across a room. You didn't know I was there. Completely unguarded, the way you almost never permit yourself to be. I thought, I don't want to win anything. I want to deserve to be in a room where she laughs like that." Alice turned from the window. 4 feet of warm, plant-scented air between them. "If you break this again," she said. Not the drawing room voice, not the composed one, but something older and truer and more frightened. "There will not be a third version of me. I am telling you this not as a threat, but because it is true, and you should know the actual stakes." "Alice," he crossed the conservatory. Not quickly, not as though he had permission, but asking for it with every step. He stopped close enough that she could see the rainlight moving on his face. "Does any part of you still feel something? Not for who I was, for who I am trying to be." Thunder shook the glass above them. Her hand moved, the old instinct, pressing against her chest to hold the feeling in. She stopped it, let her hand fall, let herself feel it, without the armor. It was enormous. "Yes," she said. "God help me." "Yes." The distance between them closed. The rain stopped somewhere near midnight. They did not leave the conservatory until well after that. There had been no grand speeches. This was not that kind of love, and they were not that kind of people. Silence and rain, and eventually a conversation with no agenda except honesty, which they gave each other with the careful, unpracticed generosity of 2 people new to giving it, and wanting to get it right. Alice spoke about the night in the ballroom in a way she never had before. Not the composed version. The real one, ungraceful, specific, without the protective distance of time. The moment her legs had considered giving out. The walk home in the rain, because she could not have sat in a carriage and held herself together. The Tuesday morning after, spent in bed, told to no one, the worst day. Tidwell received it without softening or redirecting it. He let it be what it was. When she finished, he was quiet, and then he spoke, not eloquently. 2 false starts. A sentence that fell apart, and had to be rebuilt from the middle. She found this more convincing than anything polished. It meant he had not prepared it. They parted at the garden door in a light drizzle that seemed embarrassed about itself after the evening's drama. "I would like to call on you properly," Tidwell said. "A reasonable day. Adequate notice." "Thursday," said Alice. 4 o'clock. "Thursday." He paused. "I know we have to build this from the beginning. Different foundations. I know you will need more time than one night. I am not asking for anything to be resolved. I only—" Tidwell. She looked at him in the thin gray light, with 3 years and one enormous conservatory storm between them. "I know what I need. I have become quite good at that. What I don't yet know is what this will be." She paused. "I think I would like to find out." Something in his face shifted, quietly. The way things shift when a lock you have been pressing against for a long time finally opens. "Thursday," he said. 4 o'clock. She walked home without a cab. 40 minutes. Not one step regretted. She felt, walking, as though she had set something down that she had been carrying so long, she had stopped noticing the weight. She noticed now. In its absence, the love they would build afterward was not the love she had imagined at 19. That one she had found whole and held without understanding what she was holding. This one they would make from nothing, in full knowledge of what carelessness costs, with the attentiveness of people who have survived each other and know in the bones what that means. It was not the love she had imagined. It was the love she had earned. Some things are worth waiting for, even the ones that had to break first. Especially those. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you get notified. As soon as we drop a new video, tell us in the comment section what's your opinion about Alice.